Left-hand cam.
Left-hand cam.
Yep.
Okay. Or can I look at Michael? Yeah.
All right, guys. Jonathan Lewis here with Mogro Solutions. How are we doing today? Come on, respond. I'm waiting. All right. Well, I guess I can't hear you, but you can type in the comments. So we have a special edition today. This is our new stream out of our new studio up at the Grow Shop KC up at 10018 Ambassador Drive. Today we have Mr. Eapen, Thampy, and Michael Desmond on our stream. And we're going to be discussing the 2 amendments that are slated to go on the books next year in 2022. And then we're going to discuss a new legalization bill that is in the works right now and about to come live here pretty soon, correct? So let me flip over to cam 1 here and hit this. And that way we're all on the same screen together, fellas. How are we doing today?
Doing great. Good to be here.
Eapen?
Oh, I'm just feeling good to be here, man. Thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So, we know there's 2 bills that are going to be hitting at least so far in 2022, correct?
So yeah, there's 2 different constitutional ballot initiative campaigns that are trying to do legalization. And now I think the Missouri General Assembly, the elected representatives of the people, are taking a pretty tough look at this and saying, you know, there's things that we ought to do, there's considerations that ought to be made that maybe some of these initiative campaigns are not making. And so, you know, it's just my job to, you know, facilitate that conversation and see what we can do that's best for the citizens of Missouri.
Okay, so let's discuss this. So, which one would you like to bring up first?
Well, it's kind of like, I want to talk about what
Okay.
Michael's stance is here. So
Michael, if I understand correctly,
we worked with Michael to get him to kind of showcase his perspective, because he's a legal cannabis grower here in the state of Missouri. He has a hemp license, and he was one of the first people in the state of Missouri to legally grow hemp, which is obviously cannabis with less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC. And there's about 300, maybe 400 people in the state of Missouri right now who are doing that legally through the Department of Agriculture. So I think he has a unique perspective to talk about in terms of what legalizing Delta-9 THC, aka marijuana, should look like, and especially as it relates to our most important sector in our economy, which is agriculture.
So, and I actually know about Michael's product because I also own Buddha Leaf CBD. And we were a purveyor of his fine product for our CBD sales, and we love it, actually.
Thank you.
I'm actually currently using some of it in my 1-to-1 gummy mixes that I do.
Glad to hear that.
So
Thank
it's
you.
an excellent
Thank
product.
you.
I'm very happy with and very proud of it. So, Michael, from your, let's get your perspective on things with the way the bills are going. You know, it's pretty simple and pretty easy for you to get into hemp comparatively. What do you foresee over the next 12 to 18 months in this industry, and where would you like to see it go?
Okay. Where I'd like to see it go is I'm really digging this bill as a commercial applicant for cannabis cultivation and extraction. What had happened to us when it came to, you know, when we originally put in the hard work for over a year, and then nobody here in Missouri got the licenses.
So
we pivoted.
So to be clear, you got a hemp license, but you were denied for the medical marijuana.
Yes, for medical marijuana cultivation and extraction. We had we were very well established to receive a license. Our scoring was wonky, to say the least. And we had to pivot to hemp. So pivoted to hemp, made some really good moves, and learned a lot growing hemp 45 acres at scale, organically. So
What's it like to do 45 acres, man? I mean, that's a logistical challenge.
it takes a team. It takes a team. It takes a good team. A lot of learning, especially multiple cultivars, different phenotypes. It's an amazing crop. It was a pleasure to be in that field and walk those fields.
You're doing flower and cannabinoid extraction, right?
Right.
So you're
we
basically
were cultivating for biomass, and we had a outdoor flower field, which had different protocols for maintenance and observation of the crop. So we were extracting a proprietary extraction method, and then we were also doing the smokable flower routine.
How much product did you put out of 45 acres?
Oh, wow. We were weighing, that is a question for
Give me a ballpark. Give me a
we were
ballpark.
pulling about 1,500 per acre, so 45 times 15, and then we super sacked it. We had a pretty fairly...
It's like 4,500 pounds an acre?
No, 1,500. 15 to 17. Because
Okay.
we had fields and different phenotypes that had certain issues. And then, compliance, we had to burn 2.5 acres. We went hot in a little field, and a learning experience.
Yeah. And you're one of somewhere between 300 and 400 hemp farmers in the state who...
Yeah, at that time, yes, sir.
And I know because of the pandemic and all, some of those operations have shut down, but there's still kind of a vibrant space for this agriculture to return to Missouri.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. It's in its infancy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity in hemp and cannabis too.
Did you produce any exotic cannabinoids?
No, we did not. We were primarily focused on going full vertical with our tea-free distillate and getting that out to consumers, and they're still working on some things.
Did you make any money?
I can't say not this year. Not this year. I don't believe we did.
I mean, farming's kind of a crazy business, right? Because you're so dependent on the external factors, weather,
Yes.
there's just so many things that can happen, right? So one of the perspectives on this that I'm really interested in is agriculture is our biggest economic sector in the state of Missouri, and there's some farmers out there that, in the Ozarks, you have your generational cannabis growers who've been kind of underground for a couple generations, and then you have the Amish and the Mennonites who do organic and regenerative agriculture better than probably anyone, right? I mean, in my perspective, probably the people who grow the best weed in Missouri are probably Amish.
No, they build the best barns.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That too. That too.
I was surprised at the MOA conference. Majority of the people there were Amish and Mennonite farmers looking to get into that. That was amazing to see that.
Yeah, when we did the Organic Association conference in 2018, we had easily 50% of the people in the cannabis.
I was excited about that.
The cannabis talks were Amish or Mennonite. And I think they're obviously they don't really get out to the cities like a lot of us do, but they have an interest, I think.
Absolutely. If you
I
look at
don't
states,
think a horse and buggy can get 75 miles an hour on a highway, so they can't really make it up here too much.
if you look at
Got
states
about
like
2 to 4
Pennsylvania,
horsepower.
Right.
Pennsylvania with super high Amish and Mennonite communities, they're killing it. I mean, it's amazing what those communities are doing with hemp.
Yeah.
It's really cool. to see.
And in the boot
We should be
field-
doing that here in Missouri too.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you, Michael. So you're farming hemp on 45 acres right now, correct? Because you did not get your actual application license
Right.
for commercial.
Pivoted to hemp.
So there's been some talks of micro licenses coming out next year, correct? Let's discuss that for a little bit.
I want to take this on. So the Legal Missouri campaign, which is the constitutional ballot amendment campaign that's being run by John Payne and Jack Cardetti, they want to do a couple of things with the licensing, right? So number one, if you have a commercial medical marijuana, license right now that these guys, even John Payne on Waxy's show a couple of weeks ago admitted that there's some problems with the medical marijuana licensing process, which is something of an understatement. So the Legal Missouri campaign wants to give those guys almost unrivaled access to the recreational market. They want to flip them over to full recreational production, in 60 days, right? And so, so I have some problems with this, right? Number one, there was 2,200 applicants in the original process. Their needs and their issues are not being taken into consideration. A lot of people spent tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in application fees, consultants, attorneys, whatnot, and they got denied. And now that, there's 850 appeals that are costing a lot of money, to appeal, right? You're talking $15,000 to $30,000, right? Right. So so the people who are denied are not being recognized as people who should have an opportunity in the commercial recreational space by the Legal Missouri campaign, right? And then the Legal Missouri campaign is talking about, okay, we're going to create these micro licenses. So I'm going to call this what it is. These are second-class Jim Crow licenses, right? So they want to create this license class where, if you're a micro license grower, the most plants they'll want you to have is 250 plants. Meanwhile, the full commercial licensees get to grow 30,000 square foot, which depending on your setup could be 2,500 to 4,000 plants, right? So the way the micro business licenses work is that if you do the math, they can at best compete for maybe 12.5% of the market, right? So the Legal Missouri campaign is really trying to acquire a monopoly for at least 87.5% of the recreational market, which in the Springfield News Leader a couple weeks ago, the David Brodsky from The Farmer's Wife pointed out, the recreational space is 4 to 5 times larger than the medical marijuana space. So if you think about the numbers, the medical marijuana market in the state, given our population, is projected at $500 million, $500 million, right? So with that math, the recreational space is projected at, 2 to 2.5 billion, right? That's a huge amount of revenue that Legal Missouri is trying to capture for the incumbent industry entrants, right? And so there's a big issue with the disparity and the opportunity that Legal Missouri is presenting to you. So this last week, I got the chance I've been talking to folks some of the representatives and state senators for the black communities here in Missouri. And I go and tell them this, explain how this system works, and they're just outraged because they see the disparity here, right? It's like, why are you telling me I can only get one micro license and it can only do maybe 10% of what the commercial licensee can do, and I have to do a lottery application, which is BS, right? And there's so many ways that system can be gamed anyway. I mean, California and Illinois are good examples where you saw the micro license process really gamed by the big commercial operators, because what they'll do is they'll find a token minority person to apply for the license, and they'll have a predatory contract with that individual that says, okay, if you win this license, we'll back you, and we get 95% of the revenues, right? So that's bogus, first off. But then you actually look at the application protocols, right? So the Legal Missouri micro license criteria is if your income or you live in an area that is 250% below the federal poverty level for income, if you live in a community where there's 50% higher marijuana enforcement than the rest of the state, if you live or went to a high school that is unaccredited, if you're a service disabled veteran, right? If you're I think there's one other condition I'm forgetting here, but the basic way that this works is that they're allocating licenses by who lives in the right zip code and who checks the right boxes for them, right? So the way it works is you actually are excluding the majority of Missourians, right? And if you think about just the fact that they're limiting, in one case, micro license applications to people who are 250% below the federal poverty line. Well, if you're that poor where are you going to get the funds to actually produce an application and the network, right, and open a storefront and do a build out, right? Where are you going to get that funds?
I see the same thing in people on disability and low income that are looking for their medical cards and medicine, for instance. I see stuff all the time because, we do certifications. So I see patients all the time on some of these groups coming up and say, what's the cheapest place that I can get my medical card because I can't afford the recommendation of the certification fee? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not trying to be rude or disgruntled against them by any means, because we all need to deserve our medicine, but think about it. If you can't afford $35 to $100 for your recommendation, your certification, how are you going to afford dispensary priced medicine?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
How are you going to afford anything unless you grow it yourself or have a caregiver that is willing to highly discount the fees for his monthly services? Because I'm a homegrown caregiver myself. It is not cheap depending on the strain that my patient wants and the work that I put in. Like my Sunday driver, my Golden Glue, they're real finicky. They take a lot more work than my Blueberry or my Alien Sugar cookies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They also say only service disabled veterans can apply, right? So like, what if you're a veteran but you're not service disabled, right?
Like myself.
Yeah.
I'm an amputee, but I lost my leg after I got out of the military.
Right.
But I am a veteran.
Or let's back up to a more fundamental question, right? If you're a veteran and you raise your right hand and you swore to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and you went out and to combat wherever the Department of Defense sent you, you did not make that commitment. You did not make those sacrifices so that back home opportunity could be created for some people and not for others.
Exactly. I agree 100%. 100%. Bear with me just 1 second, fixing this. There we go. And picture back on.
So, and I would actually go back. So so I call this a second-class Jim Crow license category, right? And I want to be very articulate about this, right? So, do you know who Lyman Trumbull is? So Lyman Trumbull was the United States Senator from Illinois who wrote the 13th Amendment that ended slavery. And then he wrote and helped pass the 1866 Civil Rights Act, and he helped ratify the 14th Amendment, right? And so one of the things that the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the 14th Amendment do is create protections for economic liberty. Think about the 14th Amendment that has the clause about all Americans should have the equal protection of the laws. And all Americans, if you're an American citizen, you should have the same rights, privileges, and immunities of any other citizen, right? And that was supposed to create a bulwark against the southern states telling freed black slaves, you can't own property here, and you can't own a business here, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, right? And these guys, these freed slaves are now full citizens, right? But the southern states at the time were denying them economic opportunity and opportunity to own a property and to live as with the full benefits of American citizenship. So what Congress did and the states ratified was the 14th Amendment to prohibit that and to create guarantees for economic liberty, right? And Senator Lyman Trumbull, when he was debating this issue on the Senate floor in the 1860s, he specifically talks about these kind of licensing restrictions, and they're almost exact same kind of licensing restrictions that we're seeing in the marijuana space right now, right? And he talked about how these licensing restrictions are a form of servitude, right? And this was a very powerful argument that was at the core of the issues that the Civil War was fought about, that Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation to deal with, at the heart of the issues of why we passed the Civil Rights Act, passed the 14th Amendment, and it took another century for us to, finally end those systems. But, here in the 20th century, we're in 2022. The opportunity to start a business, make a living from the labor of your hands, should be something that is equal and granted to all Americans, right? So these restrictions on marijuana commerce, on who can have a license, I think are, again, this legal Missouri micro business license is a second-class Jim Crow licensing situation.
So I think John Payne, when he was on Waxley Show a couple weeks ago, mentioned that the reason they're rolling this out is to pretty much make up for all the mistakes they made in the first release of the program.
What do you think, Michael?
Do you remember when he said that?
very contrary. I mean, it's on paper. It's very contrary to. It just seems like it's another monopoly on the rec market.
Yeah, and
I mean,
if they
it is what it is.
If they were going to rectify the mistakes that they created and they forced the state into in the medical marijuana licensing process, they should give back all the licensing fees that people spent who were denied, right? So that's one thing. So I'm working with State Representative Ron Hicks on a bill. It hasn't been filed yet. You'll probably see it next week. But one of the things that we are going to do is we are going to create a tax credit for people who are denied in the licensing process so that there's some relief for those people. Those people got screwed out of a lot of money. In some cases, people spent their life savings.
Yes.
And the least we can do is give them a tax credit for what they spent in those application fees.
Okay. So we discussed the initiative with John Payne and the new approach idea for it. Let's talk about Eric's deal. I know we haven't heard a lot about it lately because I don't know what's going on with it. But let's do a compare and contrast of the two. So what do you know about the fair access?
The fair access group, on one hand, we agree with them on the licensing proposal. They kind of adopt what Oklahoma has done on licensing, which is very simple. It's very straightforward. It's fair. The problem we identified with the fair access proposal is one of the other problems with the legal Missouri proposal. They create new possession limits that would be in the Constitution, and they create possession penalties, which would be in the Constitution, right? Both legal Missouri and fair access Missouri create an environment where if you possess too much marijuana, in legal Missouri's case, their possession limit is 3 ounces. And they say if you have more than 3 ounces, you can get a misdemeanor, right? And they don't explicitly say this, but because they don't take the statutory penalties that are existing in Missouri law out, they don't end those statutory penalties that currently exist, they still leave open the possibility of felony penalties if you have more than 6 ounces. So I have a problem with that, right?
So I'll let everybody know right now, I've got a double cert. I've got an 8-ounce cert, I'm a grower, and a caregiver, and I'm allowed to keep 1.5 pounds and carry at least, a 1.25 pounds on me at all times.
Yeah.
So would that affect me when they launch that down the road as me coming out, even though the original Missouri writing said up to a certain amount if you're...
Well, I don't think they reduce the possession limits if you have a medical card.
Okay,
but
they're just talking about
right.
adult use.
Yeah, so, but still, I have a problem with the actual idea of a possession limit because, look, it's not like we have a possession limit for firearms. Right, it's not like we have a possession limit for liquor. Like you can fill this entire place with barrels of whiskey, and and right, you go down to the Ozarks, where there's the moonshiners, right, and those guys, they're legally allowed to brew or distill, 200 gallons of liquor a year, which is probably enough to kill you.
Yeah, we just can't sell it or barter or trade it, but us as in Missouri, it's in our rights to moonshine if we want.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right, those guys in the Ozarks are going to do what they want, no matter what the law is, right? So, we might as well recognize that, right? And here's the other issue that, the other perspective we've been kind of showcasing is from law enforcement. Right, so we talk to a lot of people in law enforcement who say, hey, if it's legal, we should never have to deal with this again, right? Heck, half of them probably want to legally use cannabis, right? So with these possession limits, you get pulled down going down 70 and the cop sees a bag of weed or smells a bag of weed and says, hey, how much you got? He say, hey, I think I got 3 ounces. He's like, well, let me see it, right? Well, now he has to weigh it. Right, he has to determine if you're over the possession limit, right? So these constitutional mandates for possession limits create more work for law enforcement.
It's intrusive.
It's intrusive, right?
So cops
if they, yeah.
All right, so why do we have to do that, right? We just, why do we have to create more work for law enforcement? In Kansas City, the homicide clearance rate is 55%, right? Why do we have to create constitutional law enforcement mandates so that they have to weigh your bag of weed when they stop you, or legal Missouri actually creates a constitutional law enforcement mandate to stop and cite people for smoking weed in unsanctioned public areas. So I sat down with leadership in the Legislative Black Caucus yesterday, actually, and I said, hey, what do you think about putting in the Constitution that you have to stop inside people for smoking weed on the sidewalk, and they're like, that's a terrible. I mean, because like you're talking to, you know, if you're a black state representative or state senator, you represent a community that's been in many ways over the last few generations targeted with this enforcement, right? It has been part of systematic, the drug war has really destroyed the relationship between a lot of communities and its government and law enforcement, right? And why do we have to, if we're going to legalize marijuana, quote unquote, why do we have to create more work for law enforcement? Why do we have to put them in the task of doing more intrusive enforcement into communities that have already been damaged by this enforcement?
And let's talk about something about that, because one of the first things that we pushed about legalization in the state of Missouri was that we are putting too many people behind bars for non-violent, non-really criminal infractions that have to do with this plant and this medicine.
Having plant matter.
And one thing that they discussed that they were tired of dealing with is dealing with so many just, I'm not going to say worthless, but petty, for say, tickets to members of and constituents in Kansas City just for a plant.
Yeah.
So that was already a lot of undue work on them in the first place. So when we came in here and brought this in for medical, we were trying to release the workload off the police and off law enforcement so they could function on a more heavily needed area like
Focused
our
area.
50% murder clearance rate.
Violent
crimes.
I've never talked to a cop who said I wanted to go into law enforcement so I can bust pot smokers. Not once, right? If you go into law enforcement, you want to protect and serve. You want to protect society from violent criminals and from property, crimes, and that's what you're there to do, right? You're there to deal with the worst of the worst. You're not there to bust everyone who's smoking weed on the sidewalk. That's a waste of your time.
No, and also to get law enforcement support on this, we need to release some of the workload off of them, because we already have a negative look in law enforcement's eyes over the past decade, however many years, probably more than that, probably 5-6 decades because of reefer madness. So we spend a lot of time educating, trying to have law enforcement understand we're not your quote everyday stoner. We are professionals that work in society every day, that use us for a medicine so we can function, focus, and go on with our lives properly, correct?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
4 years ago, I got invited to speak to the St. Louis Association of Police Veterans. So if you can imagine, it was me in a room full of 200 cops. All of them were over 60. And you know what these people want to do? They want to sleep at night. Right, because you spend 20, 30 years in St. Louis doing police work, you probably see some stuff that keeps you up at night, right? So PTSD, trauma, and then like with veterans, once you leave the service, you have the VA, you have the government still at least tries to take care of you. Maybe they don't do the greatest job, but they at least try, right? With law enforcement, once you're out of law enforcement, it's like goodbye, good luck, and there's no resources for you after. So like in law enforcement, you have, a lot of issues with trauma. And well, and first responders generally, right? I mean, you're an ambulance driver, you pull up on a accident on 70 where there's a couple dead kids. That's something that's hard to forget.
I was a CNA and certified med tech for quite a few years here in Missouri and Kansas both, and just in long-term care facilities, some of the stuff I saw.
So I've had numerous people in the health industry hit me up for my hemp. So they're like, well, I test positive. I was like, yes, it's got THC, but it's not like medical. So they're looking for alternatives too, CBD, they're looking for isolates.
They're looking for low percentage THC with high percentage CBD, which I want to discuss for a second, because you being a hemp farmer and you also being in the hemp industry and field as well, I've always been a huge proponent of about a 12 to 16% THC and about a double that CBD. I believe in a 2-to-1 CBD. I believe that the lower THC and the more CBD in it has that whole entourage effect and will help your body, especially with the terpene profiles, a lot more than some of the higher percentage stuff. And I feel that in Missouri alone, not only the rest of the states, but just Missouri alone, we have a demographic that's not even touched yet, and that is in these long-term care facilities.
Yes,
oh yeah,
absolutely.
California just passed a law to allow medical marijuana use in hospitals for long-term care or hospice situations.
So here's my question to you that you may or may not know about, since we're looking at all this stuff. Is there anything that's going to maybe allow, because Do you believe most of these long-term care facilities are private based, or do you think they're public funded?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know too much about the industry, but I'm sure that, you know, most players in the market have received some kind of government funding in some capacity. I'm sure there's a lot of private ones, you know.
So would that cause an issue with us trying to get their residents or patients in that aspect? Would that be an issue for us to get them the medicine they need because of government contracts and funding? Because they've already come back with the VA and said with the VA that we're going to work it, because if we can't help you inside the VA, you are allowed to go out for a third-party medical advice if we can't, you know, help your needs. Do you think they could do something like that in the long-term care facilities, or do you think that's going to be more regulated?
So I was consulting for a little bit with an Israeli company that has 12 years of data from geriatric facilities on medical marijuana use. So I know it's possible. I know that there's protocols that have been developed. I know there's products that can be developed, and particularly for, you know, geriatric populations. And honestly, like, what it's going to take, and we both know this, is the federal government at some point has to act, right?
Yeah.
So in the United States Congress, you have Chuck Schumer, who's the leader of the Democrats in the Senate.
Yeah, Booker pushing stuff through as well.
And then you in the House, you have Representative Nancy Mace, who's a Republican from South Carolina, who has kind of a conservative approach to marijuana legalization. And somewhere in the middle, there's got to be a compromise that works that's politically possible. And we think that that's possible maybe in the next year. So, and you know, Representative Nancy Mace, you know, she had when she filed her States Reform Act, you know, talked about her experience as a victim of sexual trauma, right, and her PTSD and how cannabis helped her in that instance, right, you know, and so. You know, I think that we're now at a point where there's always been leaders from Republicans and leaders from Democrats on these issues. I mean, I'm thinking about like Rand Paul 5-7 years ago. You know, I actually had the pleasure of bringing Senator Paul to the National Cannabis Association Industry Conference in Denver in 2015. You know, and I was the first, you know, but there's great leaders on both sides of the aisle, right? And this is one issue that there's no real partisan divide on, right? There's this, like, we've got to create opportunity. We've got to get the federal government out of the way. We've got to create restorative justice opportunities in terms of expungements. You know, I'm working with Weldon Angelos and the Weldon Project and the Cannabis Freedom Alliance to ask the president to institute a systematic clemency review for federal marijuana offenders. You know, those are all things that need to happen, and we think will happen maybe in the next year.
Okay. Let's go back real quick and do a compare and contrast between the John Payne amendment that he's pushing through and the patient access bill. Let's go about how much an individual is allowed to grow and take care of. From what I've heard is there is a plant count on one and a canopy space on the other. Is that true?
I believe that's my recollection, yeah.
Okay, my damn thing. Okay, there, hey, it's back on. But, okay, so do you know what the plant count or canopy space is gonna be on those?
I'm not off the top of my head.
I'm not familiar with that language either.
Michael, as a grower, which would you prefer?
Canopy, whatever you can grow under your area, because there's multiple methods of growing.
You can see a green it.
Yeah, you can see a green it, and I've seen some bushes. So, you know, people, whatever you can hold within what you've got written out, or your business plan, or however, whatever you want to do, I think that's what it should be. You know, so if you can financially maintain what you're doing, and you're doing it, keep doing it.
So
plant counts are restrictive, in my opinion. I mean, you don't have a plant count on hemp; you just grow hemp.
You know, I tend to agree with you.
Hemp and cannabis are the same thing. One's got high THC and one doesn't. It's all cannabis.
Yep. I agree 100%. What was my next question going to be? So let's talk some more about the bill that's getting ready to launch next week.
Yeah, so there's a lot of aspects to it, but basically we're taking every good idea that's been filed as a bill in Jefferson City and some of the ideas we've got from the community and kind of putting them into a big package. We solicited input from lawmakers in other states because, in most states, you have restrictive marijuana licensing that's led to one set of problems, right, which is corruption, or at least the appearance of corruption and public controversy over access or opportunity, particularly from, certain communities. And then you have Oklahoma and Oregon and functionally California, right, because in Oregon and Oklahoma, you don't have restrictions on number of licenses, and it's very easy to get into the business. So the issues that Oregon and Oklahoma have had is that, first off, because these aren't commodity markets, people don't know what other people in the market are doing, right? Commodity markets have mechanisms and price signals that you can look at to say, okay, well, it might make sense for me to grow more this year, or it might make sense for me to grow less this year, right? Mm-hmm. So there's been some overproduction in some of these states. The other issue, and this is something that we've consulted with members of law enforcement on and lawmakers in a couple of states, including Oklahoma, is that in Oklahoma they had unrestricted licensing. So you had the Mexicans come in, you had the Ukrainians come in, the Chinese, the Russians. So you have these large criminal enterprises coming into Oklahoma, buying hundreds of licenses and playing whack-a-mole with large production operations, and then sending it to Florida and New York, right? So somewhere in the middle, there's got to be a compromise, there's got to be a solution that avoids access to the large criminal enterprises, but provides equal opportunity and open opportunity to the citizens of Missouri. So we think we've come up with some good ideas to kind of walk that middle road.
Well,
right?
like myself, I'm a grower, I'm a craft grower.
Yeah.
I have no problem sending my stuff in for testing, and I'd like to sell my stuff to dispensaries because I know it's good quality medicine.
I mean, Harborside, they did that before rec hit. I mean, there was, and that's in California. They would have certain people that met their certain criteria, and you could, as a caregiver, could take your product in to them, and they would buy it.
And see,
it's on documentaries. It's.
I think if we did something like that here in Missouri, it would really, really help the pricing battle in the state, because us as caregivers and growers, we can come in and offer for a lot less price because we don't have the overhead that a lot of commercial facilities have.
Right, and our product's better.
A lot better. We have a running joke when we get done curing a certain product. We're like, after a couple of days, you're like, oh, this is dispensary cured. We can smoke it.
Yeah.
But no, I look at things from a small business owner like myself that wanted to go for an actual license but didn't have the money to do it and didn't have enough big powerful friends from out of state to come in to help me get my license.
Seems that's where all it went.
I'm working with a couple business owners in Westport, working with my good friend Steve Segal, who is the owner of the Blue Line and City Market, the hockey bar there. Yep. Right, and there's a lot of interest from the hospitality industry, right? Because if you own a hotel, if you own an Airbnb, if you own a bar, if you own a restaurant, you should be able to, if you choose so, and if your clientele is interested in it, to offer some kind of cannabis product or access.
Kind of like Denver, the hotel owner that started opening.
That's so the Patterson Hotel is what you're talking about. So that's owned by my friend Chris Chiari.
Yep.
Yeah, I've stayed there a couple
times.
times.
I used to live in Denver, so I've been there a few times. But I think I'm with you. I believe that we need more public consumption areas because this is better for you than alcohol. Even President Obama, when he made that comment, he said it's safer than liquor, and I've inhaled.
It's a no-brainer.
So
it's common sense.
So I worked with my good friend Doug Frost, who is one of 3 people in the world to have both the Master of Sommelier and the Master of Wine certification, and he just happens to live here in Kansas City, and he's like pretty legendary in the wine business. I worked with him, and we've got an op-ed. We just sent it to Feast Magazine to see if they'll publish it. But in the op-ed, we talk about, hey, we are from the wine business. I have a background in the wine business myself, right? And one of the things about the wine business, about the hospitality business, is it does attract, people who have alcohol addictions or other other problems with other drugs, right? And if we can adopt, and so that's something that within the industry we're very conscious about and aware about, and sometimes honest about with ourselves, right? But everyone knows that if we have better alternatives that are safer, cheaper, and more accessible, that will make things better for people. Because if people can make a safer choice, maybe they're not going to have that, fifth shot of whiskey, right? Maybe they're not going to, if they have more accessible legal cannabis, maybe they're not going to grab that OxyContin pill when they, when their back hurts, right?
I'm looking for the day where I can walk into, not every bar, but more upper class restaurants or venues and sit down with a nice glass of scotch.
Yeah,
and,
I'm looking forward to those days
and
too.
a joint or a pre-roll or just something right there where I can just sit back, take a couple sips, and just relax with some friends.
Or Clark
Yes.
Grant, who used to be the chef and owner at Hogshead down on the plaza, they're no longer in operation. Or Ryan Mabey, who's the owner and proprietor of the Rieger, right? Those two guys are very interested in infused cocktails. I mean, Ryan's arguably the top or one of the top craft cocktail creators in the country, right? And I remember when Clark was at his old restaurant Hogshead, and he tried to put CBD in his cocktails, and he got a call from the ATF, he got a call from Regulated Industries, and then 6 months later they decided it was okay.
Yeah, because now you look in dispensaries and you have all that stuff with THC in it.
Yeah, you have Kemp's hemp, you have
like what is the Kona or whatever it is, that
Yeah.
this THC infused non-alcoholic beer.
yeah. Another thing I wanted to kind of highlight is like Michael, from the hemp industry. So like you have THC isomers like Delta 8 and Delta 10 THC, which you can either
THCO. They're just going to keep coming out.
You
That's the
just
loop.
said two words to me that
They're going to keep coming
that
out.
wanted to spark another conversation.
Yeah.
Delta 8 and Delta 10.
All right, so we already have legal THC on the market, right?
What is your thoughts and feelings on Delta 8 and Delta 10?
If there's a market for it, I mean, people are using it because they can't get Delta 9. They can't get medical. They're using it as an alternative, and it's
been outlawed in 13 states. Florida has, or at least 13 states. Florida has written a bill backing it for use in the state. Missouri is on the fence. You can sell it in smoke shops and head shops, places like that, but you can't sell it in dispensaries.
We're going to ensure that there's that any proposal to regulate Delta 8 or Delta 9 or any other THC isomer out of the market, we're gonna oppose that.
Now, isn't it true that even if you do Delta 8 and Delta 10, that you will still pop hot?
9, yeah.
Yeah,
It
it creates the same metabolites in your body. So yes, but the DEA admitted to Congress about a month ago, 2 months ago, that the isomer THC molecules are legal, right? Because they can be derived
So
from hemp.
I can get a liter of THC Delta 9 from medical marijuana, and then I can synthesize Delta 9 THC from CBD.
Okay.
This one is legal with the chain of custody. This one is illegal the second it crosses state lines.
Okay. Because I've heard from some governmental agencies and some stuff online that they're looking to shut Delta 8 and Delta 10 down because they feel it's one of those.
They feel.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to find out. What people really believe and really work. Because I work with Wilfred. I have his CBD cigarettes. I love them.
Some people, I mean, I've heard people do better off Delta 8 than I'm not familiar with all the other isomers, but I do see people lean more towards Delta 9 because they probably haven't had their strain, or they're using carts what's readily accessible to them. They don't know the difference, or they don't have the variety to choose from. They're just going to go do a Delta 8, and it doesn't give them the super high psychoactive effect versus that a Delta 9 would. So it's a medium. It's like a slightly caffeinated decaf.
Just a shorter half-life,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, there you go, yeah.
So people are getting that because maybe they don't want to get their medical card. They want to they just want to use D8 and D10. I don't know. I've had D8 gummies before. I've tried those. I make my own gummies actually, and that's something else I wanted to bring up with us talking about THC and CBD and hemp, is the lack of availability of mixed ratio medicine in the state of Missouri. I make gummies myself. They have my blueberry trim in it. They have CBD infused honey, and they have CBG trim mixed in as well. So I'm making a true full spectrum gummy. So I know Illicit has launched I can't remember which one it was. It's not the Lavender Jones. It's some purple or something. Purple tonic. The 2-to-1 mixed ratio. It's the only one that's been out there from any other facilities that I've seen. What is your thoughts on needing to have more mixed ratio stuff in the Missouri market and the availability? Because I see, especially like some of these people that we were talking about in these long-term care facilities, or people that are amputees or in pain like myself, we would prefer a lower THC percentage and a higher CBD percentage and a better terp profile, so it affects the areas that we need. How long do you think it's going to be till we actually start to see more mixed ratio stuff out there?
Well, I mean, just a fundamental barrier to this is federal law, because until you can do clinical trials and really dial in, true clinical data on population level, studies, it's going to be very hard to say, okay, this is the validated clinical solution, right? Or just on an entrepreneurial basis, the market usually arrives at solution that consumers want, right? So at some level, the federal government's got to move forward with, Congress has got to act.
Okay, so let's move forward and ask another question based off that. Since we need more data and more numbers for federal government to do that, say a home grower wanted to do the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think in dispensaries.
So here's the thing, and here's my question, because I haven't dove in to find the answers out, and I'm sure you guys have, so that's what I'm going to ask. I'm a home grower. I have my cultivation license. I have my plant count my numbers of 6, 6, and 6 for my one person. If I decide I want to bring hemp in there and then start breeding and crossbreeding against that, do the CBD hemp plants in my grow count against the THC, or do I need to apply to the state of Missouri for a hemp manufacturing license to grow a few plants in my grow to breed with THC?
That's a good question.
I think you would, just to cover all your legal basis, you'd want to apply for a hemp permit from the Department of Agriculture, which is like
you definitely want to do that.
5-page application and like $700 or $800 fee.
$750.
Yeah.
Per year. But the second it goes over 0.3%, that it's going to count towards medical. So your hemp crop has to get sampled, and you're going to need.
That's an interesting question.
So what I was trying to think of.
There's no home grow provision for hemp right now.
Okay.
That would be something I'd be interested in.
And that's what I wanted to bring up, because myself, that's what I want to specialize is doing, mixed ratio medicine. And so I need to find out the best way for me to make that, to accomplish that.
That's a good solution. Like I said, the bill I'm working on has not been officially filed yet, but that's an addition we could make to allow for hemp plants as part of your home grow allotment.
Hemp is an agricultural product. It's a soybean product. You can look at it as tomatoes, or any just agricultural product that's just highly restricted.
Hops.
Yeah, hops, exactly. Hops is a cousin of
same family.
Hemp. Yeah, same family. So I think people that haven't had the opportunity to grow hemp because it's been outlawed, everybody should be able to grow hemp. Without,
I'm kind of...
but no, to a degree, because a lot of people don't know what they're doing, and then you got cross-pollination.
Right.
It's one of those...
It's a catch-22.
Yeah, it is. Because I would hate to have my fields pollinated by somebody that doesn't know what they're doing. And there's a lot of feral hemp here in Missouri too. I know where there's acres of feral hemp. And I took, samples before any of this legalization came out. I've got multiple strains in multiple areas of land-raised hemp that I could definitely do something with those strains.
Because I've got some abacus at the house, and I've been wanting to pop that and cross it with some of my blueberry.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. That would. I mean, there are people that have been doing that, and look at Charlotte's Web.
Who is it? Yin Yang Seeds out of Colorado Springs.
I've got some Yin Yang stuff.
They reached out to me about doing a breeding project with me about mixed ratio stuff. That's why I kind of brought this up, because they reached out to me about a month ago.
Cool, good deal. That's cool. Yeah, I got some Yin Yang genetics.
Stumpy's got some skills apparently, but. But no, there's a lot of stuff that's coming up that we need to be able to address. The rollout was not what we expected it to. John Payne admitted that.
Well, it was exactly what I expected it would be. because I predicted all this 4
I
years
know.
ago.
I remember.
Yeah.
Do you remember a few years ago when we had you and John Payne on our stage, and was that St. Charles?
Yep.
Yep, but St. Charles at the Sheridan, I think, at the hotel. We had the discussion up on stage, and I wasn't backing John Payne to begin with in that, but I think I'm not calling out that I disrespect the man or don't like him or anything. I'm just calling out that we need change. We need it in Missouri, and we need people that have the voice to push for this change and don't mind standing up and screaming from the rooftops that we need this.
This discussion kind of made me think about 3 years ago, John Payne did an interview with someone, and he talking about hemp, and he's talking about hemp doesn't have buds. And I heard this, I'm like, this dude doesn't even know basic cannabis botany, and he's coming up with policy that affects all of us and that, these big funders are paying for, and I'm like, we've got to do something different.
We do. So, Michael, let's top some things off really quick. What are your hopes and aspirations for the next in November 2022? What's your hopes and aspirations of what will happen? What do you foresee might happen in this?
It'd be nice to get this rec bill passed. It would open up a lot of doors for a lot of people that had missed out initially. Hopefully, that a lot of the people that were applicants are still in the fight to get their cultivation. It was a lot of people's dreams to be doing that. My dream. I'd like to see hemp up to 1%. I don't know if that's going to get there, but
well, that would require a change of federal law.
Yeah,
but that has been proposed. Rand Paul proposed that, I think.
Absolutely. There's no reason why we should be burning hemp fields because it goes a little bit over, a little hot. As far as there's just a massive demand for cannabis needs medically, and we need to fill that demand for the patients, for the people. This, as a former applicant, this is the only bill that seems to really be speaking to me, because the other ones are just corporate cannabis monopoly, reinforcing that on a recreational level. All cannabis use is medical use, but it's just titled differently for tax and political reasons. So it's overcomplicated.
Yeah, I tell people, and I've been telling people the same thing for 4 or 5 years about these proposals, right? And 4 years ago, if you sat down with me and you looked through the logical steps I was making, it was hard to disagree with me. But then you look at the New Approach group, and they have all the money, and they've got this petition, and they, and they're headed for the ballot, and it was hard to not vote for them, right? And the problem is that with these ballot initiative campaigns, if you're not giving them lots of money, then you have no chance to provide input or share your point of view and have that incorporated into the final product, right? So, the legislative process, you can start with any bill you want, whatever it says, but it's a process. It's a process of arriving at consensus, of weighing stakeholders' opinions that may differ or be disagreeing with each other, right? The great thing about the Missouri General Assembly is that everyone can go up there and give the lawmakers a piece of their mind. No one can be excluded, right? The mentality of the ballot initiative campaign is that you're excluding the people who you don't like or you don't agree with or who are not giving you money, right? So just from a process-based perspective, I've come to appreciate the deliberative, transparent nature of what the General Assembly does because, again, they don't have to like me, but they have to listen to me. And they don't have to agree with me either, but maybe there's someone up there who will figure out that, hey, my perspective has some value and maybe I can incorporate it and make a better law for the state, right? So, what I'm really hoping is, there's like thousands of people out there who tomorrow, if you told them you can get a license if you spend this and you do this and you do that, would probably do it, right? My point to those people is you cannot wait. You cannot wait until something passes to jump in, right? If you're not at the table, you will be what's for dinner, right? That's exactly what happened with the New Approach and the medical marijuana licensing, 2 years ago, right? And the entire thing that Jack Hurdetti and John Payne are hoping doesn't happen, right, is that citizens of Missouri rise up and talk to their lawmakers about this, right? The thing that the Legal Missouri campaign is predicated against, like 100%, of their campaign depends on the voters not understanding the details of their proposal, and is 100% not dedicated to making sure that the elected representatives of the people understand what's in that proposal, right? I went up to the Capitol last 2 days. I sat down with conservative Republican leadership. I sat down with Black Caucus. I sat down with several other groups in the Capitol. And once they understood the details of the legal Missouri proposal and how bad it was, there was this outrage across the board, whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're Republican, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're from Boot Heel, whether you're from St. Louis or Kansas City or Springfield. There was outrage about like how can they put these bad ideas in our Constitution and discriminate against us, right? So what I'm urging people to do is to look up your state representative. You go to www.house.mo.gov, or your state senator. That's www.senate.mo.gov. Look up who represents you if you don't already know. Send them an email. Send them a call. If you don't hear back, be persistent. Most lawmakers will get back to you personally within 3 to 5 days, right? And if you don't hear from them, tweet, Facebook, whatever. Get your community engaged, get your family engaged, get your business partners engaged. That has to happen now.
So as constituents in the state of Missouri, our actual job, we actually have to do homework, guys, and it's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. We have to get a hold of our senators, our Congress, our people, our politicians, and push this through. We have to read the ballots and the amendments and initiatives and understand them ourselves, or tune into a program like mine or Big V's or somebody else's, where we have the people on the show discussing these amendments and these bills to know which one to look out for and which one's best for us and which one's not.
Mm-hmm. So there's actually lawmakers, who we have great relationships. They may not exactly agree with me on the legalization issue, but when I sat down with them this week, I explained, look, the voters will put this in the Constitution if we don't act. And here's the bad things that you don't want specifically to see in this Constitution. When I was able to explain that to these lawmakers who I know and have a good relationship with and have respect with, right, and who may not quite be there yet with me on the legalization issue, they understood if we don't act, there's going to be bad things that happen to the state. There's going to be the appearance of corruption. Governor Parson, about a month ago, gave an interview to my old college friend, Jason Rosenbaum, who's a top political reporter in the state with St. Louis Public Radio. And he told Jason Rosenbaum that it's time for the Missouri General Assembly to take up this issue. That was a huge, huge deal, right? The day after, Representative Ron Hicks calls me and says, hey, that's the signal. I'm in. This has to happen the right way, right? It has to happen in a deliberative, transparent way where our stakeholders are representative, no matter their point of view. Right? And so if you think about it, Governor Parson's statement is really Governor distancing himself from MoCan Trade, from Legal Missouri, from the lobbyists who represent those groups, because those groups do not represent the interests of the people of Missouri. They've caused great public controversy. They've caused the appearance of corruption, right? And I have a personal friend, I won't say his name, who has actually offered the position of director of the medical marijuana program. And I told him, he calls me up and he says, what should I do? I said, hey, I'm not going to ask you for any corrupt favors, but if you were the head of that program, it would be great because I know you, we've got a great relationship. Just the ability to have access to your office would be tremendous for me, right? And he gets back to me and says, you know what? Don't be too disappointed here, but I'm not going to take the job. And he told me I'm not taking the job because the governor wants nothing to do with this program, because nobody in Jeff City vetted that language. Nobody in Jeff City said, will this work? Will this not work, right? Nobody in Jeff City said, okay, this is how you apply for this and how this is going to make sense, right? The licensing process, the appeals process, all the nuts and bolts of that process were cooked up by John Payne, Dan Viets, and Jack Cardetti and their cronies. And they cooked it up in a certain way because they knew how to rig that system, right? And so, the voters handed Governor Parson a constitutional framework that no one in Jeff City had ever seen before. No one who wrote that language for Approach Missouri had ever run a state program before, right? And so Governor Parson has to implement it, but it's like you look at it and there's so many things that don't make sense, or are just going to not work the way that they're supposed to or that they're wanted to, right? And so governor, as far back as 2019, when they were looking at how to implement this program, was like, I want to be hands off of this, because like this is just a bag of rocks, and it's gonna it's gonna get too heavy. I'm gonna drop it in my foot, right? And that's kind of what happened, right? So and no one in the state had the expertise to understand how to do this whole process, this whole licensing and scoring process. So of course they have to hire a consultant, and of course MoCan Trade is right there to tell, hey, this is a consultant we want you to hire, right? And they ended up hiring a consultant who was behind the corruption scandal and the licensing fiasco in Arkansas, and who had regulated all the marijuana businesses in Nevada. And you want to tell me that guy who's running that consulting company doesn't recognize the same applications he saw in Nevada that are coming through in Missouri from the same people who are, you know what I'm saying?
Do you think the names would become familiar if you see them all the time?
Yeah, I mean, the Legal Missouri and the New Approach Missouri campaigns were funded by a network of crony capitalists and consultants, right? I mean, think about who made the first money from the medical marijuana. It was the consultants. It was Amendment 2 consultants. It was Jay and Diane Sarkowski at Canada Advisors. All these consultants who came down to Missouri to take advantage of desperate Missourians who didn't know any better, right?
Yeah.
I mean, John Payne was getting people calling up saying, hey, I'll give you $50,000 tomorrow to write my application because it's due in 2 weeks, right? And
I just reached out to Todd Scattini and his crew because they do an excellent job.
yeah, but why should you have a consultant that you have to pay? I have a client here in Kansas City. He paid $200,000 to a team out of Denver for a full vertical stack of licenses, flew them out, put them up, all this expense, put down another $1 million in property, and I remember, man, he was so sure that he was going to have a top shelf application and he was going to win all the points and he was going to get the license. He got denied on every single one, right? And he was wealthy enough to have those resources. But you think about the ordinary mom and pop. You think about folks in poorer communities in your state who they maybe have $50,000 or $100,000 or $200,000 in equity that they can capitalize on and bring to an operation, but they don't have $200,000 to write an application, right? They don't have $1 million. They don't have $5 million to put into a business should they come to market.
No, and it's $125,000 on average just for an acre operation just to get it set up.
Yeah.
That's just setup.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we did all our application by ourselves. I mean, minimal. I mean, we had some help from other resources, but I know a lot of people that paid a lot of money to get that. And
Yeah.
we lost a lot of money. I mean, we literally, it's just handed it over to, thanks for trying.
Yeah.
No, it hurt.
So guys, we're at an hour now. What I'd like to do, I would like to, if you're available maybe next Friday, I don't know if you are or not, I'd like to have you two both on again, and let's start discussing Kansas and what we can do over there to help get our system.
My good friend Barry Grissom, who's the former U.S. Attorney under Obama, is now on the Kansas Cannabis Council, or he's on the board there, and I know he's done a lot of hard work, and there's I think some good movement within the Republican leadership. Now the Kansas Democrats are proposing constitutional initiatives through the legislature, which as long as all the
I have to say though, I was really impressed by the landmark vote where they took it by 30? Was it 30 or 70?
It was pretty significant. I don't know.
It was the most blown out vote in legislative history.
Yeah, I do remember seeing that. I don't remember.
So I'd like to get in and discuss more of that in detail about they're coming up with just edibles and tinctures and stuff like that and the plans for Kansas, because as we're getting set up here in Missouri, Kansas, from what I've heard, I've talked to some of the government officials already over there, next session it's going to pass.
Yeah.
So we need to be prepared for that. So
and
would you guys be willing to come in next week and have a chat?
Yeah, we could talk about that.
All right, cool.
I got to check my schedule on a couple of things, but
It doesn't have to be Friday. I want to have you guys back. I'd like to have you guys on every couple weeks.
Okay.
just come in
you know what
and
you should
discuss
do
stuff.
is you should pull in some state representatives, right? So like maybe Ashley Bland Manlove, she's a state representative from Kansas City. She's the chair of the Black Caucus. I would love to see you get her perspective on all this. Right?
If you can help set me up with the connections, I would love to have all these people on.
Yeah.
Brandon
I'd love to
Ellington.
have them
You
on.
know, Councilman Brandon Ellington, an old friend
Because
of
like I
mine.
stated, we're trying to do this stream with an entirely different aspect.
Yeah.
We're using this for an educational platform. We want to know what people think and what they're doing. And no one out there is doing this right now.
Yeah.
And we need to do this. We need to educate. So let's plan a weekly or bi-weekly live stream. Let's get some politicians in here.
You know what? One of the things you could maybe do is on the 26th, which is a Wednesday of this month, we're doing a lobby day up in the Capitol.
Okay.
So maybe you can bring a couple of cameras up to there, and
I think I can make that happen.
you know, so
I need to go to Jeff City anyways.
yeah, you know, you got, you know, the great thing
I need
about
to get my retail sales license. Their website keeps putting me in processing at the very end, and I can't get it approved. So I've actually got to go to Jeff City and just get it done. So that actually be a good thing.
Yeah,
Two birds.
you know.
I get two birds stoned. I mean, two birds, one stone.
you know, come up to the Capitol, talk to your state representative. Your state senator is actually an old college friend of mine, Senator Tony Luetkemeyer, and you
Okay.
know, when he was student body president at Mizzou, I think this is back in 2004. Columbia was at the time considering a municipal ordinance initiative to make marijuana possession the lowest law enforcement priority.
Yeah, because they were one of the first in the state to decriminalize even before St. Louis.
And so Tony got asked by the Maneater, which is the Mizzou student body newspaper, what he thought about it. And he basically said, I don't see a problem with it. You know, there's no crime, there's no victim. I'm probably paraphrasing his words, right? And so then, 14 years later, he's running for state senate here in Platte and Buchanan counties. And, his primary opponent in the Republican primary dug that quote up and sent out a mailer saying, don't vote for Two Tokes Tony. And I called Tony up and like, hey man, these guys probably pulled out some votes for you, right? And another thing I did up here is, so Jackson County Sheriff Mike Sharp, who is no longer in office, he was the first county sheriff in the state to endorse medical marijuana and legal marijuana. And, he did 3 terms in Jackson County.
He's the one I met a couple years ago, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was also at one point the president of the Missouri Sheriff's Association, which was awesome, and had some crazy experiences with him up in Jeff City a couple times. But your sheriff up here in Platte County, Sheriff Mark Owen, was the second sheriff in the state of Missouri to endorse medical marijuana.
I would like to get Mark Owen here on my show.
Yeah. Well, I'd call his office.
I really would.
I mean, say, hey, Sheriff, I know this is a big issue for you. I'd just like to get your perspective from law enforcement. All right, and I think, from my experience, I do probably more outreach to law enforcement than anyone else in the state over the last 12 years, right? And, with law enforcement, they usually come around to the side of the right argument, but there are people who are very deliberate. They like to take their time, and they won't talk to you, or even if they agree with you privately, they're not going to agree with you if they see you as someone who's like trying to demonize them, right? So a lot of the success I've had in law enforcement advocacy has just been, look, I have a very thick skin. I go talk to anyone about anything, about marijuana, about legalization, about freedom, and I like to go to cops and say, hey, not only do your citizens not want you to do this, but wouldn't you like to not have to worry about this?
I went next door to grab some lunch the other day, and 2 officers were eating lunch, and I just walked up to them and I said, I know you guys don't hear this enough, but I just said, I want to thank you for your service.
Yeah.
I said, you guys do a wonderful job in a very hard situation, in a very hard demographic right now, in a very hard landscape. And I said, I just want to thank you for what you do. And then I introduced myself as the guy that owns the grow shop down the street, and I was like, I'd like to work with more law enforcement because I think KCPD building's right up here, Platte County's right up here. That's why I love this location. I want to bring law enforcement in here and educate them and work with them.
They need to stop worrying about cannabis and worry about more synthetic drugs that are devastating and decimating our
Opioids.
Opioids, methamphetamines, and all the,
Yeah, what I like to tell cops is I like to tell cops, I want to make your job easier.
It would.
Exactly. And they actually sat there, we had a discussion, I told them what I did for a living, and they actually thanked me.
Yeah.
So it's a new landscape out there. We just need to quit being so scared to approach them because they're just people too. They have their own thoughts and their processes. We just need to talk to them and find out what they feel.
Change the stigma.
Yep.
Change the stigma. You go to California, you go to Colorado, you don't have that here. A lot of people are still getting out of that stigma. I mean, when I first saw the legalization markets, I just couldn't believe the people I was seeing in dispensaries. Like, that guy that's a regular looking person, you know, and it's time for Missouri to catch up.
Yep, and dispensaries are for tourists. Support your local plug.
Yep.
Support
Last
your
ditch
local
effort. Yeah.
support your local florist.
Yep. But just like I said, I wanted to come in today and do some discussions. Apparently my GoPro's been flipping out, zitzing out of me here a little bit today, but it still hasn't had that much of a difference. Give me 1 second here. Boom. So, but yeah, let's go ahead and close this out today, guys. I want to thank you so much for coming in and joining us, and I would like to let's get something scheduled that we can come back in here in the next week or so and sit down with some politicians and let's continue this discussion and see what we can get done for the state of Kansas as well.
Sounds
Because
good. Thanks for having us.
we know they need it because right now they're like a loft above a great party. They're kind of like Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But at least Canada's got good weed. So, but guys, I want to thank you so much for coming out and seeing us today. Once again, this is Michael Desmond and Eapen Thampy. Eapen, lobbyist in the state. We've been working together for years. Michael, wonderful hemp farmer, wonderful quality product. Top shelf compared to a lot of the stuff I've seen. And as a CBD shop owner, I've seen a lot of CBD. I have a lot of people try to sell it to me.
Thank you.
And
Thank you very much.
oh man,
And we got to support our local farmers, man.
we have to.
We need more farmers growing.
Yeah.
We do.
You know,
Craft
one
them, you
of the
know.
things that's most exciting to me about cannabis is that it introduces kids in urban settings to agriculture.
Yeah, my kids,
Right.
my kids were in it. When they're out there, harvest time.
And speaking
they're
of
doing
which, if you guys have anybody out there that wants to learn how to grow, bring them up here to the Grow Shop KC. We can teach you how to grow anything from deep water culture peppers to tomatoes to your own medicine for the state of Missouri.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're here to do. Is
It's
try to
easier
help out
than you
everybody.
think.
So guys, once again, thank you so much for coming out today. We will see you again here really soon. We're going to keep this up at least, like I said, a couple times a month and bring people in and start pushing this through. So guys, thank you very much, and we will see you soon. Interworld, internet world, interweb world, Facebook and YouTube. Thank you for tuning in on our first episode of the new educational series of the amendments and bills in the state of Missouri that we're looking to pass. Next episode, we're tackling Kansas. After that, we'll come back to Missouri and see if we can get done. Thank you guys very much for tuning in, and we will see you later.